Unit 7, Part 2 notes. I can solve quadratic equations by factoring. Part 2. So we are still going to be using that zero product property we talked about in Part 1. So if two terms being multiplied equals 0, one of those terms must equal 0. And again, we need our polynomial equation to be in factored form. So two things being multiplied, because again, to use the zero product property, two things have to be multiplied. It's a very key part of that zero product property. So we are going to be solving quadratic equations that need to be factored first. So we're going back to those factor boxes that we used in Unit 6. Sometimes we might need to use the factor box, sometimes we might not. It's really up to you, your preference on factoring. So in this case, we have x squared plus 3x minus 8 equals 0. That first step is to make sure it is equals 0. So that's good. We have that equals 0. So we need to factor this trinomial, x squared plus 3x minus 18. Now, when it's x squared, there's no number here in front of this x squared. We know it's going to be x and x. And then it's going to be, the numbers here are going to be numbers that multiply to make 18, and then add to make that 3. Oh, and then 18 is negative. So we need to multiply to make negative 18 and add to make 3. So we can list those factors of 18. So numbers that make 18, 1 and 18, 2 and 9, 3 and 6. So those are our factors of 18. Those are numbers we could use. And since it is negative 18, I know one of those values needs to be negative. And so I'm going to make the smaller value negative because this middle value is positive. So which pair would add to make 3? That would be negative 3 and positive 6. So those are going to be my factors here. And we can always check. Negative 3 times x is negative 3x. 6 times x is 6x. And negative 3 and 6 makes that 3 in the middle. So now that we have our factors, we have factors of x minus 3 and x plus 6 is equal to 0. Now we can solve for x. So these are like two-part problems. We have to use our factoring skills and then our solving skills. So now we can set both factors equal to 0. So x minus 3 equals 0 and x plus 6 equals 0. And then solve both of those. So undo that minus 3 with a plus 3, and we get x equals 3. And then undo that plus 6 with a minus 6, and we get x equals 0. Take away 6 is negative 6. So our answer would be x equals 3 and x equals negative 6. All right, so another example of this, x squared minus 5x equals negative 6. Now again, we need to make sure that our equation starts by being equal to 0. So to do that, we're going to move this minus 6 or negative 6 to the other side by undoing. So we'll do plus 6 on both sides. Negative 6 plus 6 cancels out, makes 0. Then on the left, please make sure you don't add anything that's not a like term. So these are all going to stay separate because none of them have the same variable. So x squared stays x squared minus 5x, and then that plus 6 stays plus 6. Now we have a trinomial that we can factor. So we're going to make two factors. And this time I'm not going to use the factor box. I'm just going to think about it. What numbers multiply to make 6, but add to make negative 5? Multiplying to make 6, we have 1 times 6 and 2 times 3. 2 and 3 make 5. To make it make negative 5, we're going to make both of them negative. x minus 2 and x minus 3. And now we set both of those factors equal to 0. And then we solve. So we undo that minus 2 with a plus 2. So x equals 2. Undo that minus 3 with a plus 3. So then x equals 3. So that's how we do factor, then solve. All right, 2 more examples. Really, I'm just going to focus on that factoring piece just to give us that refresher of factoring. So 4x squared minus 5x minus 25. We need to factor this because it's already set equal to 0. So 4x squared minus 15x minus 25. So in this case, we need to multiply 4 and 25. We get negative 100. And then we need factors that multiply to make negative 100, but are going to add to make negative 15. So that means my bigger number is going to be negative. So we have 1 and negative 100, 2, negative 50, 4 and negative 25, 5 and negative 20, and this one right here, 5 and negative 20, are going to add to make that negative 15. So we have 5x, negative 20x, and now we figure out what our factors are. So 4 and negative 20 have the common factor of 4. X squared and x, they both have an x, we take out that x. 4 times what makes 4, or excuse me, 4x times what makes 4x squared, so that'd be 1x. And then 4x times what makes negative 20 would be negative 5. And then we fill in that last factor box. What's the greatest common factor between 5x and negative 25? That would be 5. So now we have our factors. We have 4x plus 5 times 1x minus 5 equals 0. So now to finish solving that, we would set both of these factors equal to 0. 1x minus 5 is really just x minus 5. So to make your solving process easier, you can take away that 1. And then we would solve both of these equations. When you solve these equations, again, we undo that plus or minus first. So we get negative 5 equals 4x. And then we divide both sides by 4. So we get x equals negative 5/4. Or again, you can change that into a decimal by division. And then we solve that second equation, undo that minus 5 with a plus 5, and we get x equals 5. For this last problem, just to make sure this video doesn't get to be too long, I'm just going to show you how to get it set up and get started, and then if you'd like to finish it, you can finish it on your own. So again, we always need to make sure our equation is equal to 0. So to do that, I'm going to bring this negative 23x over to the other side and the minus 15x. So to do that, we just do the opposite. So we're going to add 23x and we're going to add 23x. And then we're going to add 15x and we're going to add 15x. So really when we do this, when we take one term and move it to the other side, all you need to do is just make sure you change the sign to the opposite. So instead of minus 23, it's going to become plus 23. So when I write it over here, it's going to be 4x squared. And then it's going to be plus 23x. And then it's going to be plus 15 equals 0. Always make sure you write it in standard form. So with your highest exponent first down to your lowest exponent, because that's going to make it easier to factor. So then we put it into our factor box of 4x squared plus 23x plus 15. And then you can use your factoring skills to finish solving that. If you have any questions or want to go over that last problem with me, you can always join office hours. Otherwise, you can move on into your practice. There are 8 problems for you to factor and then solve. And then once you're done with all 8 of those, you can do that check-in on Schoolaging.